Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is a Friday, so it's a self-improvement Friday. And I'm always delighted to have my friend John present. It's just incredible variety of topics and connecting different ideas with source materials of all kinds. So take it away, John.
Cool, thank you. Welcome everybody. I'm appreciative. We are all spending a Friday here together. Thank you for everybody returning. It's nice to see some new faces as well. Today we are talking about, as the meetup description has noted, we are exploring the concept, the philosophical concept of the question, is ignorance bliss? It's a popular cliche we always hear echoed and promulgated throughout society. So we're going to explore both sides of it, either yes or no, how it like formed in its origin. And to do this, I want to first use a backstory, as Shrikant was saying, for a little bit of context, so we can refer to some source material that I think exemplifies this question very, very well. I had it in the meetup description. It was actually a episode of a series called Black Mirror. It was on Netflix. It's season 1, episode 3. It was entitled The Entire History of You. If you guys got a chance to watch it, awesome, beautiful. If not, totally fine. I'll summarize the necessary and relevant points. Although, after this discussion, I actually do strongly implore you guys to watch it, because you'll get an entirely different interpretation and analysis of that particular episode. It's very thought-provoking. It's very well made. So the episode, the backstory is as follows. It's a little bit held in the future. It's not that futuristic. I would say 10 or 20 years. And in this setting, in this scenario, these individuals in society have an option to have an implant in their head that exactly records their sense impressions. So in other words, their first person experiences of auditory input and stimuli and visual. So first person experiences, you can immediately recall memory in extreme vivid detail since the moment that you had the impression. So in other words, nobody can lie to you, because you can say, okay, when did we talk? This date, this time. I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to project it on a screen. I can see exactly what you said, exactly what I saw at that moment and heard, etc. So that has deeply philosophical implications in itself, right? The reliance of memory, the reliance of truth and falsehood and deceit and misconception, etc. But that's a different topic we're going to get into later, maybe. So the episode follows the story of a young man. He's, I would say, middle class. He's just starting out in his career, in his life. He's married. He just had a toddler, and he's this ambitious kind of conscientious man. And the story starts with him arriving to a dinner party where his wife was with their friends, mutual friends. But he arrived there a little bit early, and he noticed that his wife was like a little bit too friendly with another gentleman at the party, and like nothing really wild, nothing out of the ordinary. But she was just like really flirty, like really close in his physical proximity, like touching him, etc. And then when she saw him, she was like, "Oh, you're here." She kind of jumped back a little bit, like she had an idea of what she was doing was wrong. And also, the main character noted that there was a wild discrepancy about like her attitude when she was with this new man and when she was with her. She was kind of like let down, like, "Oh, you're here. Hi." It wasn't like, "Oh, nice to see you, honey. How was your day?" etc. She was kind of let down, like, "Oh, you're here. I have to like put on this mask now." So that kind of bothered him a little bit, but he was like, "You know what? I'm not gonna like let it bother me. I'm here. I just had a stressful day at work, stressful interview. Let me unwind, have a good time with my friends, have some drinks, whatever." So they go about that. And then throughout the entire night, this new man, this potential affair in this guy's mind, was actually a past lover of this wife. But this was like way back, she said, in college days, like a decade ago or something. So it wasn't really a big deal, like no bad blood, whatever. But the main character, I don't remember their names. I don't even think their names were important. But the main character just had something like a gut feeling about this guy. He didn't like him for some reason. So on the way home, he noticed like his wife was laughing at his jokes that were not even funny. She was laughing the most out of anybody in the room. So he was like, "Hey, there's like some connection going on there." He kept like pressing and harping on his wife about it. And she was like, "Listen, it's nothing. Like he's a funny guy. He's charismatic, etc." So he was like, "No, there's something here. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I just don't like him. He kind of seems like a jerk, etc., etc." So he was kind of projecting on him. And then they get in a little bit of an argument, a little bickering. They get home, and the husband, he's pressed on this issue. So he decides to like put his memory of the night onto the TV, and he keeps watching it repeatedly, overanalyzing every little detail, over analyzing like the moment he stepped in the house, like how she was, you know, dealing with this new man, how she was when she saw him, how she was at the big dinner table, reacting to his jokes, not looking at him, etc. Like these little specific, meticulous details. He's obsessing over this. He ends up staying all night, like analyzing this entire scene. And she wakes up in the morning. She's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you going this deep into it? It's not that crazy. Like, you need to get some help. It's not that serious. It was just like a little fling. We used to have, and it lasted like a month. And he's like, ha, I got you. Because when we met, you said that fling lasted a week. And she's like, yeah, week, month, whatever. Not a big deal. So he's like, no, there's something here. At this point, he stayed up all night. He was binge drinking. He's belligerently drunk at this point. And his wife isn't really complying with his like request to like splinter in more information. So he decides to go to this guy's house that he suspects his wife having an affair with. He arrives at his house, again, belligerently drunk. And he's like, hey, delete your memories you have of my wife, because that's an option with this implant. Delete all of the memories you have of my wife. And he's physically threatening him with violence. So the guy's like, okay, whatever, I'll do it. And to do this, you have to project your memories onto a screen, like to delete them. And while he's doing this, the main character, the protagonist, sees a little thumbnail, like sees a snapshot of one of the videos of the memories on the screen. And that memory had to be recent because it was in the guy's bedroom of what he recognizes a painting in specific. So he has this new information and he goes back to his wife and he's like, hey, listen, you said it was long over. You said it was a month. You said it was a week, whatever. I knew you lied. Here's the proof. And he puts up his vision, his memory of the other guy's memory on the screen. He's like, hey, this guy was in this bedroom because look at the painting on the wall right behind you. He's in his bedroom. So you're kind of caught in this lie. She's speechless. She doesn't really have anything to you know, explain away or to justify this with. And then he harps even further and he's like, when was this? Like, give me the exact date, down to these like very, very vivid details. He's like, you know what? Show me, like put that memory of that night, of that affair onto the screen. She's extremely embarrassed, obviously, but he's like, no, I need to see this. I need to know. I need to understand. Long story short, that time that they had an affair was right around the time that his child would have been conceived. So then the story kind of ends in ambiguity. And I assume the conclusion was like the child was not even his. So his entire life was a lie. His relationship was a lie. His wife had an affair. So he decided to, I guess, press on long enough until he discovered the truth. And then this truth, this acquisition of knowledge and information and insight, pretty much destroyed his worldview. It threw away it took away from him everything that he held beloved, he held dear. He obviously loved his infant, his toddler, but it was not his. He obviously loved his wife, but she was unfaithful. So there's a lot of implications there. And I think the main one that I want to go through, really quick, backing up 1 second. The story ends with the guy kind of ruminating over his choices, and then he ends up taking the device out. So he kind of lives in the moment, if you will. He doesn't want to record all his memories anymore, or he just wants to like dispense with all of those memories because, again, everything up until that point of his life was a lie. So the implications here I want to discuss are, I would say, the most obvious of like uncomfortable truth versus, I don't know, numbing ignorance, you could say. And when I was thinking about this presentation, when I was thinking about the course material, I obviously thought of the prominent one in you know, pop fiction, which is the Matrix, of course, the red pill and the blue pill. Which in the movie, if you don't remember, the red pill was where Neo in the Matrix has a sneaking suspicion that something about his world is just off, just like the main character in this episode. Something's off. I can't really tell what it is, but like I know there's something there, and I'm curious enough to pursue it. I want to know what's at the bottom of this hole. I'm going to keep digging, even though it's uncertain, even though it's fearful, even though I might lose everything that I have. Okay, I'm still pushing forward. So in the Matrix, Neo has the option of the red pill, which is from Morpheus, and he says, quote, stay in Wonderland and see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Or you can take the blue pill, which would be like numbing ignorance. You can go to sleep and wake up and believe and continue to propagate this illusion, right? Believe whatever lies that you want to believe. Just go on living in your blissful ignorance, right? So how I want to structure this, I'm going to look at like the implications on each side, on each choice. And keep in mind that I wouldn't say this is a large dilemma in the macrocosm of life. I think we have this moment like multiple times. I would argue even multiple times a day. We have the option of like, okay, am I going to pursue truth even though it's uncomfortable? Am I going to uphold and propagate a comfortable illusion? Because it's emotionally familiar, etc. So I would say choosing the red pill, right? Choosing truth. It's going to have the effects and consequences of fear, of discomfort. It could elicit fear, doubt, worry, being like a sense of like unsettlement with your actions and decisions, because again, you could lose everything that you've gained up until that point because everything might be a lie, right? So I think this would lead to strength because it's an obstacle, right? You're fighting against some things. So I think the red pill like ideology would lead to strength. And then conversely, I would say obviously the blue pill would lead to weakness because it's only entertaining ideas that are familiar. It's only entertaining ideas that are comfortable. It's taking what reality is and blindly accepting it and saying, okay, I accept this just as it is. We talked about last week the allegory of Plato's cave, right? The individual who just sits forward, doesn't question anything. They're just like, okay, I accept this, I accept this, I accept this. And they don't question reality. They don't really look at anything that should be addressed. And to explain some of these points, I have a quote from Nietzsche, two quotes actually. The first is, I believe this was from Twilight of the Idols, where he says, "We have art in order to not perish from the truth." Now, that's a very thought-provoking idea. Like, what does he mean by that? I'm not entirely sure, but I think one idea is that, like, truth, it can be detrimental in the short term, right? Like in this individual in the story, in the episode, he lost everything that he loved. He lost his marriage, he lost his kid, he probably lost his job, his house, etc. It ends kind of in an ambiguous manner. And the cinematography did a really good job in highlighting this and making this question making the question like equivocal, like meaning open to interpretation, because what they do in the end of the episode is they parallel and they contrast the past life of him, like looking into his kitchen, seeing it, it's beautifully lit by sunlight, the windows are open, there's beautiful breeze flying by. His wife is staring lovingly into his eyes and he sees that from first person. And then it just contrasts to like the present. And it's like, it's dreary, it's dark, it's gloomy, it's gray lighting, it's probably raining or thundering outside. And there's like beer bottles on the counter. It's like very bleak, right? They do a very good job at encapsulating this moment. And like that appears on the surface as very difficult. So I think a encapsulation of a moment like that, of the emotion like that main character must have felt in the moment, probably elucidates a little bit of Nietzsche's quote, we have art in order to not perish from the truth. So truth, it seems to would be like difficult work, right? It's difficult. It's going to demand strength, and it's actually going to cultivate strength, which actually leads me into the second Nietzsche quote, where he says, and this is in Beyond Good and Evil, the strength of a person's spirit would then be measured by how much truth he could tolerate. More specifically, to what degree he needs to have that truth muted, sweetened, diluted, or falsified. So I believe the individual in the episode was a perfect exemplification of supreme strength, because again, he threw away his entire life pursuing this truth. He was willing to do that, and he's working relentlessly in the pursuit of expansion of knowledge and awareness of what reality was, instead of what it appeared to be to him. And another idea on like pursuing what is hard, I'm going to read from, this is Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. And it says, most people have turned their solutions toward what is easy and toward the easiest side of the easy. But it is clear that we must trust in what is difficult. Everything alive trusts in it. Everything in nature grows and defends itself any way it can. It tries to be itself at all costs and against all opposition. We know little, but we must trust in what is difficult as a certainty that will never abandon us. The fact that something is difficult must be one more reason to do it. Okay, so this is going to cultivate strength. And I think we're going to explore a little bit more consequences after this, but I want to briefly flip over back to the blue pill. So I think not addressing these things, like not analyzing what we know to be an indicator that something is different from a reality. If we don't address that, I would argue that leads to weakness. Okay, going back to Nietzsche's quote, the strength of a person's spirit is determined by how much truth you can tolerate. So if you can't tolerate a little bit of truth, I would say that is maybe not weak character, but like underdeveloped character, right? It hasn't gone through any obstacles. It hasn't really articulated and analyzed what it could do, because it has no misfortune and it has no tests, right, to act out its strength. So I would believe that leads to stagnation, downhill. And when we look at this ideology, we look at this like, okay, red pill, like seeking truth versus blue pill, like upholding ignorance and upholding things that are comfortable. You can look at this in terms of how they identify themselves. So I'll talk about the identifications and then I'll talk about examples. So it's simple. So I would say somebody in the former half, like the red pill, the truth seeking, relentless pursuit of truth, as this is an individual that identifies themselves with qualities and philosophies. And the blue pill person is somebody that identifies with possessions and roles. Okay, so now let me give an example. So the first, the former example, identifying with attributes, qualities, philosophies, etc. This is the type of person that says, I am someone who, okay, someone who, and they list their ideologies. I am someone who, and actually, let me give an example for everybody listening here. I'm going to give you an example of qualities, and I want you to answer, just type in chat, what you think a profession or a career could be that fulfills these qualities. So I am someone who loves facilitating connection. I love bringing people together in a place that they can create memories with loved ones. So what do you guys like? Just answer right now in chat. Type in chat what you believe someone could do as a profession. I love bringing people together so they can create memories. Okay. What do you guys think? Wedding planner. That's actually a really good one. That's the one I had in mind. A mom. Absolutely. Shrikant. I agree. Yeah. Event planner. Yeah. These are beautiful. Photographer. That's actually another one I had in my memory as well. Photographer, tour guide. Beautiful. These are perfect examples. So you see what I'm saying? This person identifies with these philosophies. They identify with, I'm the type of person who X, Y, Z. Okay. That is dynamic. In other words, it's transferable. So you guys gave brilliant examples. That person can be any one of those professions. Where on the other side of the spectrum, if I'm in the blue pill, I identify with possessions and roles. If I say I'm a chef, and that's all I am, I'm just a chef. Okay, I don't know how to do anything else. I don't know why I'm a chef. I'm just a chef. So what does that mean? It's not transferable. If my company goes bankrupt, if my leadership decides to replace me, what do? I'm in a crisis because I don't know. I don't have anything that's transferable. I haven't articulated my philosophy or my qualities on why I like to be a chef. Okay, chef could fit that example as well. I love bringing people together for them to formulate memories. That could be an example as well. But if that person hasn't articulated their philosophy and qualities and attributes, if they only identify with the role of a chef, that's not transferable. Okay, another simple example is like in terms of physiology. So if I identify with my value of like, I'm somebody who's dynamic, I'm somebody who exercises all my weaknesses, I frequently engage in strength training, in my conditioning, in my explosiveness, in sprints, I'm good with cardio, all of these things, guess what? I can play any sport that I want. I can go snowboarding tomorrow. I can go mountain biking next week. I can try a new sport I've never tried because I have transferable skills. I have balance, I have athleticism, I have stamina, strength, etc. Whereas on the other hand, on the other side of this dichotomy, this distinction, a non-transferable skill would be someone who, for example, let's say I invest thousands of dollars into the top of the line golf clubs, the best the market can buy. What can you do? You can play golf. That's it. You can't do anything else. What happens if you're not good at it? What happens if you don't like it? Guess what? You're in a hole now because that's all you cultivated is that role of being a golfer. Okay, you haven't cultivated the role of being an athlete. So therefore you have non-transferable skills. So, and this can be interpreted another way as well. It's like be aligned with a purpose and not a position. So it's like you can ask yourself in your career, okay, what if I do like my job, why do I like it? Like what does it align with in terms of my philosophy? What does it allow me to express that leaves me fulfilled? Okay, the position itself doesn't leave you fulfilled. What it allows to express leaves you fulfilled. Its net result, its net gain, its effect on the world gives you fulfillment or meaning or passion or happiness, etc. It's not the profession in itself, it's the qualities. So I think the red pill person, so going back to the examples, the fictional examples of Neo in the Matrix and this individual in this episode, they were somebody who, for example, is aligned with, all right, I'm going to seek the truth. Even if it hurts me, I'm going to value adventure over security. I'm going to be somebody who is relentless. I'm going to be somebody who is okay with being uncomfortable in the pursuit of learning and knowledge. I'm going to be somebody who does not give up. I'm going to be somebody who has persistence and consistency. Where on the other half, if the person took the blue pill, that's saying I identify with like Neo in the Matrix, for example. I identify with my past life of being a computer programmer because it's certain, it's familiar, it's comfortable, etc. Okay, so that would be the distinction there. And if we look at these and how they manifest and what the consequences are, I would say that the result from the red pill would be like expansion, right? You're transferable, you are dynamic, you are incongruent with the flux of eternal change, which is the only law that governs all reality. Is everything is in a constant state of flux, everything is changing. So if you are somebody who identifies with qualities, guess what? You are transferable to whatever industry, to whatever experience, to whatever relationship, to whatever dynamic you choose, whatever you find yourself in at the moment. In other words, you are expressing yourself as your qualities are expressing yourself using like roles as tools instead of being used as a tool by the role. And I mean, roles are very like idiosyncratically, they're weird, like linguistically anyways. Like if you actually think about how people define themselves as roles, it never actually made a lot of sense to me. So I could understand maybe if it's like what you do for a living, maybe, but like, let's think of a simple example. If I write one piece of poetry, am I a poet? How many pieces of music do I have to produce to be a musician? Okay, if I have a hobby of like making bookshelves, am I a carpenter? Like, am I all those things? You see what I'm saying? It's like, so I think instead of identifying with roles, it makes more sense to identify with qualities, and therefore those qualities will express themselves in anything. So if it's like, I love being creative, I love this, okay, look at, here's all of the list of the potential aspects and avenues that I can express that will through. I think it's a lot more constructive way to look at reality. And you're not fixed. So like I said, you're dynamic, you're ever flowing, you're in flux with the universe. You think quick on your feet, you are dynamic, you are ever changing. Conversely, obviously the blue pill would be someone who is stuck. They are contracting, they're not expanding. They value security and safety and familiarity over adventure and novel experiences and creating memories with people they love and experiencing the world and doing new things, etc. So, I mean, in short, like one thing to summarize this entire process of like red pill versus blue pill, I think the person that chooses the red pill would be actively living, and the person that chooses the blue pill would be passively existing. So there's no deliberate like volition there. There's no expression of will. They're just a subject, an intermediary object for whatever influences are around them. So it is now that I want to go into the application. Like, what can we learn from these stories? What can we learn from this implication? And I have, I think, 4 main points here. So the first is, don't let your suspicions linger and manifest and promulgate and proliferate. So we have the obvious example of the individual in the episode. Like, he had a sneaking suspicion that his wife was cheating on him, and he's like, okay, it's like something pops up out of the garden, like a weed or something. And you're like, that should have my attention. It's easier to address now. And if I let it like proliferate itself, it's going to be much bigger of a problem. So now that it got my attention, I should not ignore that. Peterson actually says, Jordan Peterson, one of the quotes he said that stuck with me forever, right when I heard it, he says, never underestimate the destructive power of sins of omission. Omission meaning like just putting something aside, ignoring it, not addressing it, right? So it's like, if you see an issue, if you see something that requires your attention, even if it's small, don't neglect that. Okay, never underestimate the power for that thing to proliferate and become stronger than you, and then you're in a real mess in a week, a month, a year, 10 years. It's impossible for you to address now, because you've let that thing grow willingly. You've let it suck up all of your resources, and it's become like, what's this saying? As the twig is bent, so the tree will grow, right? It's easier to deal with things as they're small and as you notice them. So that's the first idea. So don't let your suspicions linger. If you have a hunch of intuition or a voice of conscience telling you something, address it. If it's nothing, not a big deal. Okay, whatever, you still have peace of mind that you've addressed it and you know it's not a malicious issue. If it is, then solve it. The second idea is don't remain in something, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a career, whatever it happens to be, that is destructive or toxic or damaging just because it's familiar. So don't value comfort and familiarity so much that it's actually going to eat you alive. Yes, they're pleasant to have every now and then, but I think that the fundamental philosophy that is the quintessence of this is you should value adventure more than security. Okay, I think I always try to live with that mindset. The third application that I have here is, don't ignore indicators that entertain the possibility of reality having a discrepancy with your appearance of reality. Okay, so it's kind of related to the first one, like don't ignore your suspicions, but it's also like, if you see something that, again, is a discrepancy between what you believe to be true, what your judgments are about the world. So you have this much information, and there's always, I always love that, like there's a pie chart. It's like, okay, what you know is like 3%. What you don't know is like 7%. What you don't know is the other 90%, you know? So it's like, don't overestimate your abilities and your judgments on the world. Like don't, you know, be so certain that you know everything as infallibly and incontrovertibly true in your own life. So have a sense of open-mindedness, obviously not too much. There's a healthy mediation and balance here, but be open to other possibilities in the way that you do things. And the fourth point is simply to, you know, going off of what I was talking about in the implication part, is like cultivate qualities and not roles. So don't be identified with your role as whatever you do, whether it's a teacher, chef, accountant, manager, entrepreneur, etc. So even if you do have a fulfilling job, that's great, that's wonderful, I'm happy for you. But I think it still would hold merit to sit down and ask yourself, why does this position bring me fulfillment? Why does this position bring me meaning, bring me happiness? Why do I like this? Or why don't I like it? So sit down and actually identify your qualities. What type of person are you? A good exercise I've always heard is a eulogy exercise. Is like, write down what somebody might say at your funeral. Oh, this person was XYZ qualities. They're not going to focus on like, oh yeah, they were an accountant, right? It sounds silly. They're not going to talk about your roles. They're going to talk about your qualities, your attributes, your way of living, your philosophies, your idiosyncrasies, right? They're going to talk about the way you did things, not what you did. It's how you did it. So it can always help to identify our qualities and attributes. And this is actually, I think, very useful advice if you're ever looking for like it could be a career change, or maybe for young people that are kind of like looking for a career to start. I think this is a actually healthy example to sit down, identify your qualities. And once you have that list of qualities, so I am the type of person who XYZ, make it as long as you want, paragraph long, page long, be very specific, very vivid. And once you have this, you can look at any potential careers, any potential activities, any potential relationships, any potential engagements you're going to choose to engage yourself with. And instead of like going down the list one by one, saying, okay, I'm looking for a career. Would I like to be a chef? And you picture yourself being a chef. Not really. I wouldn't like that. Okay, this career, this person's hiring, this firm is hiring. They're looking for accountants and like account managers. Would I like doing that? You picture yourself, I don't know. I actually don't really know. Maybe I'll try it. Oh, it turns out I actually hate it. Okay, so instead of doing that, like that large trial and error, because life is too short for all of that, if you instead look at your values, your list of values, your list of attributes, your list of philosophies, all you have to ask is like, okay, I have this set of information. I have this philosophy. I've articulated my values. And all you have to ask, instead of what I like being a chef, what I like being an accountant, all you have to ask is a chef congruent with my values? Can I express my values through being a chef, right? Can I express my values through being an architect? Can I express my values and my philosophy and what I love and what would bring me the most fulfillment and meaning and passion and joy in this existence through being an engineer? Right? That's all you have to ask is it congruent? Same thing with relationships. Is this type of person congruent with these beliefs, or are they going to be directly contravening against it? Same thing with, I brought up athletics in the example earlier. Like if I'm someone who loves like novel experiences and adventure, like when someone brings the proposition, let's do this new sport I've never done before. Absolutely. You know why? Because I'm not identifying with being a snowboarder. Maybe I've never done it, but I identify with being somebody who gets out of my comfort zone, with trying new things, with spending my time investing into experiences rather than possessions. So I try to make memories and not own things, because at the end of your life, that's all you really have is your experiences and your memories. Okay, the things, the material possessions, yes, they're important, your house, your car, etc., like security, all these things, but they're not inherently what brings us fulfillment. Okay, the experiences, the memories, are what we actually hold of intrinsic value. So I think that can be a very useful exercise to do, even if you're not looking for a career change or a new career. It always helps to get really specific on what brings you meaning, what brings you passion, what brings you fulfillment and joy, and then you can engage in other things in life instead of just doing this crazy, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach. Life is too short for that. So that is the summation of the analysis and the application. And I still have, a few quotes that I didn't really know where to fit in here, but I thought they were actually relevant and I thought they're interesting to share. So I have one from Ludwig Feuerbach, which was actually Nietzsche's mentor. I don't know how to say mentor, but he was an influence of him. Where he says, I would rather be a devil in alliance with truth than an angel in alliance with falsehood. So I thought that was interesting. And I think a different, like if you look at this trickled down through history, Nietzsche said something in his denouncement of faith, even though this doesn't have to have any necessarily like theological implications. But Nietzsche said, if you wish to be meekly be at peace, then believe. But if you wish to be a devotee of truth, then inquire, right? That's basically red pill, blue pill. And another one I always loved is by Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, around the same time, mid 19th century, around the same time Nietzsche, where he says, it is better to go wrong in your own way than to go right in somebody else's way. So I've always loved that as well. So with that said, that is the summarization. I'm going to hand it over now to Shrikant. He's going to moderate some questions, and then before we break out into the breakout groups.
Thank you, John, for a great presentation as always. Let's go to Q&As. Let me remind folks that we have 4 rules that I've used for 4 years. Number 1, when you have a question, raise your hand. You can raise your hand by typing exclamation mark in the chat, or asking a question in the chat, or raising your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to disagree, speak your mind, disagree with anything, but do so courteously. With that, first one up is Jeff, followed by Joe, then Aaron, and then Jonathan W. Jeff, go ahead. Jeff, go ahead.
I wanted to make sure I was unmuted there. Okay, so thank you, John. That was intriguing, as always. I actually found this one particularly intriguing. And I'd like to read back to you 3 sentences that I keyed in on my phone here while you were talking, and just ask you to comment on them in a way. So first, if I understood correctly, strength of character can be measured by the amount of truth someone seeks to learn and the amount of truth that they can handle knowing, which I think is fascinating, given the things that we don't know. Second, that the quality of a person's life might also be measured by the outcomes that they seek to generate, the abilities they grow to be able to produce them, and the actions they take to use their abilities to achieve those results. Really sort of related to purpose and the assets that we cultivate in order to invest, in order to generate those returns. And last, that what I would say is that both of these elements have personal, individual dimensions to them, but just as importantly, they have interpersonal applications. They have an application regarding who we are in the world.
Jeff,
what we're trying to do.
Jeff, let's keep the questions short, please. What's your question?
Well, I'd like John just to say a few more words about those couple of things. Just okay. What else would you say regarding some of those things, and did I get them right?
Yeah, so the former 2 points, I think we can accurately go over those in the breakout groups. I think it's a more appropriate stage for those, but I will address the first one. I do agree. It's like a very thought-provoking idea when I first came across that in Beyond Good and Evil. And I think it's actually like incremental, right? Like, I don't think we can what's the analogy? Pandora's box, right? You can't just open Pandora's box to somebody and expect them to be the same. Actually, we're going to discuss that in Borges Aleph in the next few weeks. And I think it is incremental, because like once you learn truth, I would say people say truth hurts. Like, that's a common cliche. I never really understood that. And I think it only hurts our illusions. So to the degree in which you are affected negatively by truth, I think that is in direct proportion to the degree that you are living an illusion. So if truth hurts a little bit to you, you're living in a little bit of illusion. If truth hurts a lot, I think you're living a lot of ways that are simply incorrect or deconstructive or just factually wrong, right? So I think it would be necessary to view this in increments. Nietzsche says in the in Zarathustra, he says, 10 times a day must thou overcome thyself, but also 10 times a day must thou reconcile again with thyself. So reconnect with yourself. So in other words, okay, you're on this trajectory, you experience truth, you're knocked off a little bit because you're confused. You know, like this main character in this, this episode, he lost his family, he lost his wife. Okay, so that's a little bit of a ebb and flow, right? He went down, but then he has to reconcile. Okay, now I'm up here again. It shakes him a little bit, but then he can handle a little bit more truth moving forward. So I do think it's incremental with time.
Okay, next up is Joe, followed by Aaron, followed by Jonathan. Joe, go ahead.
Hey, John, thanks for the time tonight. Awesome presentation. I appreciate it. I just want to ask really quickly, what do you think of as the role of acceptance, and specifically accepting that you're going to die someday and knowing that, and how that allows you to seek truth? Versus if you don't accept that, you have this risk averse kind of, you're just like just going through your daily life and, you know, and not necessarily seeking truth. So, I mean, that knowing you're going to die, I think is what, like a very important factor in this process.
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes is from Seneca. He says, "A man who fears death will never do anything worthy of a man who is alive." So, and that was huge amongst the Stoics, right? Now, like contemplate your fate, right? Know that you're going to die. I've always loved that philosophy, and like that's been a primal motivating factor. We actually talked about this in Borges' The Immortal, right? We were talking about like this individual who lives forever, he gets nothing done because there's no deadline, right? There's no discrepancy between you and the individual members of the species because you can do everything. You have all the time in the world. But the very like imposition of a deadline, knowing you're going to die, and also knowing that it's completely uncertain, it could happen literally at any moment, that encourages, I would say, a strong-minded individual. It encourages to live the life that they always wanted to live. Okay, like they're going to dispense with like these criticisms of adhering to blind social norms. It always puzzled me once I heard this this is actually Darren Hardy from a personal development seminar. He said a lot of people spend their lives pleasing people and worrying about opinions of people who wouldn't even show up at their funeral, right? So it's like, it's irrelevant anyway. Like you can do things like, yes, you might get criticized, but like they're going to forget about it tomorrow and the herd is just going to focus somewhere else the next 5 minutes. Like it's transitory. It's never really that meaningful. We tend to overestimate like our mistakes. We tend to like dwell on our mistakes and embarrassments and being exploited, etc. So I think it's a very necessary exercise to contemplate death and realizing that we only have a finite allotted amount of time here, and that should motivate any competently minded and strong individual to do what they've always wanted to do and dispense with fear, dispense with expectations, and be the child in this third metamorphosis of the spirit and do what I've always wanted to do. Live a creative life, live a designed life, seek truth, be dynamic, identify with philosophies and attributes, and expand, not shrink.
Thank you. Next up is Aaron. Aaron, go ahead.
John, yeah, great presentation and analysis as always. One thing I want to ask you though is I kind of feel like truth is inevitable. Like even in the Black Mirror episode, if they didn't have this like chip in their head that rewinded everything, eventually the guy would have seen that like my wife doesn't love me anymore.
Right.
He would have walked in there. So I'm kind of thinking, even with Neo, like even if he chose the blue pill, like he would know this is kind of a fake environment. This isn't real. So I'm wondering if like we have a choice. It's just like, are we delaying the truth? Because I kind of feel like the truth is inevitable at the very end of it.
Well, it is inevitable, but here's the thing, like so you have to look at it like the time length that like the temporal duration that truth manifested until the time like it was obvious, so as Confucius says, 3 things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Yes, it's going to come out eventually in the end, but the time duration on like which you realized it was a potential seed, it was an indicator, as did Neo, as this individual in Black Mirror. All of that time you're just regressing, you're getting weaker because you're letting your life be like demanded and commanded, and like you're subservient to this lie, right? You're upholding this lie, and you know it has power over you because you had this indication early on in your life. But then by the time it manifests, okay, looking at this example through Black Mirror, okay, would he want the inevitable truth 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road after he's, spent all of his love, all of his resources raising a child who is not his? Okay, I think that would be a lot harder to deal with than like, okay, I have a toddler. I love this toddler. I love this woman, but like, I'm living a lie. Okay. Yes, that's hard, but like, what's harder, that or dealing with the consequences in 15 years when it's inevitable?
Yeah,
You know,
no
I'm
doubt.
saying like, you see what I'm saying? So I would say address them now. So they don't like so you don't have the weakness in 10, 15 years to deal with that. Because that could lead someone to suicide, right? Their entire life has been a lie. They raised somebody, like that's dismal. That's orders of magnitude more damaging than saying, oh, it's a toddler. Like, yes,
Right.
you still love it, but like, you know what I mean? It's
Like-
nothing like raising a whole family.
So it's like pain today or more pain tomorrow.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thanks.
Next up is Jonathan, Sanjay, Paul, Faisal, Andrew, Mary, and Saul. Go ahead, Jonathan W.
Thanks again, John, for organizing the presentation. I've got a question. So one thing I enjoy doing is watching or reading whatever it is you're presenting on and then comparing my takeaway to your takeaways. So you spoke about identifying abstract qualities instead of identifying with a specific role and the resiliency that, you know, we're given by doing that. What in that episode of Black Mirror made you, like, what did you notice in that made you think of that as a takeaway?
That's a very good question. He was very pressing. He was very resilient. Like, not once did the individual of that episode like falter back and go like to his wife's side. Like, from the beginning, he was a little bit skeptical, and he was like, you know what? I think there's something there. I'm going to entertain it. I'm going to inquire about it. I'm going to ask my wife, etc. Not after that moment, like that was his catalyst moment. After that, he did not like subsist at all. So he was determined. He was determined for truth. He was valuing the truth over his comfort zone, right? Over what he cherished most, which was his wife and his toddler and his house and his family, etc., career. So and maybe I'm superimposing my own values over this individual, sure, but he valued truth, and he valued this like pursuit of expansion, the pursuit of truth. He valued having, like, I would say, like a clean conscience, right? Like not letting something manifest that, you know, is like dark, but you don't want to look at it. So he had strength, he had courage to look at this, even though it might destroy everything that he loved. He didn't just let it like manifest and say, oh, you know, she's a beautiful wife, I should be lucky to have her. That's none of my business how she acted with that guy at the party, you know, because some people would do that, right? If they identified with like, oh, I love my wife, I want to be in this forever. You know, if they value that comfort over and security over like the truth and reality. So maybe I'm, you know, again, superimposing my philosophies, projecting my values here. But with that, in accordance and coalescing with the matrix, I just thought of that.
Next up is Sanjay. Sanjay, go ahead.
Sorry, yes. So this is a fantastic topic, but I think it's very complex. There are actually elements that hopefully we could get into in the breakout room, because I actually have experienced something like this, obviously not the same, but so one of the things I just wanted to bring up is that it's very difficult for people to understand exactly how they'll behave in a situation like this unless they've actually gone through an existential situation where they're faced with very painful truths. It's extremely difficult to anticipate or you know, think about this from an imaginary context. Secondly, one thing that I learned from the rabbit hole is that the truth about the world is actually difficult. You know, psychologists estimate that probably close to 50% of people, at least in American society, are untrustworthy in various ways. You know, cheating especially, but other ways also. And in other societies, it's actually not that much lower. And so, given that context, how do you see? You know, if we know that most, you know, let's just make it simple and say half the people around us are untrustworthy. How do we navigate that? I mean, you know, it's. I mean, I agree with most of what you said, and Nietzsche's principle is completely on track here. You know, I mean, it comes down to the strength of the character and the ability of a person to understand and deal with very challenging truths. But let's say that even, you know, with that, if a person has to choose to give up tremendous things in their lives. Is that still good? I mean, is that something? I'm not sure if I'm asking correctly, but this is a very complex topic.
Yeah, you're right. So I have one approach to that, and I would say them losing that thing is good if it aligned with their values, if the end result aligns with their values. So I talked about, obviously, cultivating your philosophies and attributes and characteristics instead of possessions and roles. If you cultivate this, in other words, if you design your life and you say, I want like a circle of friends that is trustworthy, I want this type of life, I want this type of career, etc., I want to be this type of person. If you completely vividly articulate your ideal, your life, you live your life by design and not by proximity, meaning like haphazard influences from your immediate environment dictate your choices, right? That's proximity, living by proximity. If you live by design and you end up losing your friends, end up losing your job, end up losing your career, whatever, because of this pursuit toward the values, absolutely that is a positive gain, okay? Because it is consistent with the ideal that you have established. And going back to Nietzsche's discussion about last week, the man who does not know the way to his ideal lives more frivolously and impudently than the man with no ideal, and his definition of a great man being a play actor of his own ideal. So that's what I would uphold the most significance in, is like, is it congruent with what the individual wanted in the first place? If it is, it's a gain. If it's not, it's a loss.
Next up is going to be Paul, Faisal, and Andrew. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Great topics, and I've been here a few weeks. Love them all. I'll just introduce my question, which I typed in the chat, with the thought that for the true seeker of truth, if they're going to be strict, even his standard wasn't quite enough. If you have the technology to implant those memories, to bring back those memories on the screen, the technology could exist to plant them, or they could be false. Secondly, let's forget all that, because that's sort of academic, and say, suppose that technology didn't exist, and suppose DNA testing didn't exist. So the person would never truly be able to know with that kind of finality. And there's many questions that fall into that category. Like if you said, does God exist? And if so, what is his manifestation or something? So my point is, and now I'll read my question. Maybe there's not a single answer to this binary question as you posed it, between the blue and the red pill, and that one should use some form of wisdom to choose where to dive for answers and where this will be fruitless because of the bounds of knowledge or other reasons. So that's my question and thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, sure. So, there is as Sanjay was talking about, like, this is a deeply philosophical concept, like on the concept of truth in its totality. And this can be an entire, 3-hour philosophical discussion in itself, but I'm talking about like practicality measures. And you brought up like the possibility of like implanting memories. I'm just talking solely in the case of like, that's why I use like a subject material as of like Matrix or Black Mirror, to make it like pragmatic, like pull it down to earth, because we can talk about the nature of truth for hours, but to bring it down to earth, okay, the truth was like his wife had an affair. And like in Neo's case, the truth was he was living in an illusion. The Matrix was the real world. He was propagating a fantasy, right? A false reality. And they were both in both characters' experiences, they were dangerous, and they valued the expression and expansion and learning and acquisition of knowledge more than they valued their comfort. So they both had, pleasant lives on the surface, like superficially, but they were meretricious. They didn't have an inherent value to themselves. So values are all subjective, right? So I can't impose my values on him and say he should have done this. It's like whatever he wanted to do. Again, it kind of ties into my last answer. If it's congruent with their values, then it's worthy of inquiry. If it's not congruent, then like it might be fruitless. And you're absolutely right. Like some areas they might not know enough, or it might be they might get conflicting results or conflicting information, or it might be hinged on trust and not verifiable evidence. Like in the real world, if I say, oh, it was my wife cheating on me, I might have to just trust her blindly, or whatever relationship dynamic I have with her. So there's all kinds of nuances and like contextual answers. So I don't really have like you said a black or white answer, but that's the info I have on that, given the subject.
Next up is Faisal.
Okay, thanks, John, for the the presentation. I think it's a very vast subject. It's hard to kind of tie into one direction. But I was curious about how one see change in one's life and how that can tie into truth and the search for truth. And also another thing is I was curious about, how one live with its own truth. And so, because the main character, has to kind of ask himself that question is, how does he live with that truth, of his wife probably cheating on him, and whether he has to act on it or not. And that's also, to me, I just kind of circle it back to change because, he's encountering change and we're always encountering change in life. And that to me is about how we approach change, whether we seek, truth, once we see change, or whether we investigate, or whether, we have a proactive approach, or whether we just kind of sit with it and, and kind of go with the flow, basically, kind of attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this relates back to my example earlier about like the main philosophy that I tried to impress on my mind is like value adventure over security. So both these individuals in the example like Matrix and Black Mirror, they were living in terms of being congruent with their values. I would say they identified with values. I mean, again, this could be my projection on them, but they identify with values instead of their positions and their roles. So they were dynamic. They were they were congruent and reconciled with like the flux of this eternal law of change. So therefore they valued adventure, they valued novel experiences, and they were willing to take that risk of like, yes, I might lose things, or yes, like I might not like what I see on the other side, but like I asked for it, right? So it's like I got exactly what I asked for. So it's like I can't really blame anybody in that sense. So yeah, they were valuing adventure, so therefore they are open to new experiences. They welcome new experiences. Where someone in this like blue pill mentality, again, like a blanket statement, I understand there's a bunch of context and nuances here, but for sake of example, like a blue pill experience would be like, I'm valuing my safety, I'm valuing my security, I value what's comfortable, I value what's familiar. I don't want anything that's scary. I don't want to do anything hard. I don't want to do anything challenging. I don't want to do anything uncomfortable. That leads to weakness, that leads to stagnation, that leads to regression, that leads to a life full of regret. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I'm wondering as well,
next up,
sorry.
Faisal, there are
Okay, sure,
about a
sorry.
dozen people in, trying to ask questions. What we'll do is that that's what the breakout rooms are for. So we can go back and forth
worries.
with
It
everybody.
just lead me to another question, but that's okay. Don't
Thank
worry.
you. Next up is going to be Andrew, Mary, Sol, Mark, and Corey. So Andrew, you're next.
Okay, thank you. To start off, this isn't my question, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start with a statement and then a question. So I've gotten into some Aristotelian ethics past few years. I'm a big fan of just kind of what you're saying about values, but more, I guess, for me, it's skills to practice. So I think, okay, like here's something that I want to get better at, whether it's like self-assertion, something like that, where it's a continuous thing where I know that I'm not as good as, maybe the ideal, but I'm challenging myself by continuing to work on that. I guess I'm just kind of curious because you seem to read a lot and try to make your lifestyle philosophical in nature. I'm curious what you think of the Aristotelian virtue ethics, because I read a little bit of it, but I'd be interested if you know any more about that.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I haven't read that book. I do have it in my library. I have not got to it yet.
The brick. I understand. I've been putting it off too.
Okay, as folks, there are lots of new people here, so just I want to tell you the reasons for these rules. So all our meetups are structured in a certain way. We give time for the presenters who put a lot of work into coming up with a presentation to put their thoughts on the table first. Then the questions are they're clarificatory questions. You're not trying to kind of express your views at this point. You're trying to kind of bring, get clarifications. If you see any contradictions, you're pointing them out and giving the presenter a chance to lay out their position in the fullest way. The main part of this evening is the breakout rooms, where you get to talk. See, I mean, the natural inclination to go back and forth, to kind of get to the bottom of things is what makes us, good thinkers. And that's what, but it is very difficult to do in a group of 44 people. So what we do is that we do breakout rooms of about 6 to 8 people each. So you can go to the bottom of questions over there. And then you get to come back into this large group, and each person will get 2 minutes to give their takeaways. And that's where you can, you know, put thoughtful kind of summary of what you got from it, or if you have a position which is contrary, you have a chance to fully express yourself. So that's the structure, and this is what we have found. I've been using this structure for about 4 years in-person meetup as well as online. This is the way in which, you see, there are amazing group of people here. This is the best way that we have found after a lot of experimentation, so that you hear many different voices, you get to consider a variety of views, and you get to express your views fully. All right, so that's why we do it this way. All right, so next up is, I've lost the thing here. Okay, next up is Mary, followed by Soul. Mary, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to touch on what you mentioned, regret a couple minutes ago. Truth of an event, like the infidelity, includes an act and intent. In a Black Mirror episode, the wife kept doing the acts of infidelity over and over. The intent was there. She'd been unfaithful over and over. But what would have been a case where the person regretted the act? I mean, do you think that dissolves the intent? Do you think that regret changes the past in any way? Does regret undermine the original intent of the act, remove it, and basically change what is the truth of the event?
Personally, this is a very idiosyncratic answer. Obviously, everybody has a different answer for this. Personally, I would say no, regret would not invalidate the actions, because in that given moment, it was exactly what she wanted to do. Okay, she wasn't acting like you can transpose your values on like how you should have acted in the past, but at that moment in your life, it's exactly what you wanted, or else you wouldn't have done it, right? Or else you would have acted like you believed the current you would have acted in that situation. But given all the nuances, all of the contextual clues, all of the variables, all of the influencing factors and governing variables, she wanted to do that. She wanted to be like, she wanted to have an affair. She wanted to engage with this other person. And she did that actually multiple times. So that would especially invalidate it. It'd be a little bit like more leniency if it was only once, and it, like maybe she was under the influence or something like that. Like there's a bunch of context and nuances here. But personally, my answer to that is no, regret would not invalidate the intention there. No.
Next up is Soul. Soul, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks so much for creating this space. So happy to have heard of this community. Nice to be here. My question was whether or not it makes a difference in terms of implication when truth is released. So in other words, is there like a time and a place for truth, or is truth always best served fresh?
My answer goes back to the Nietzsche idea of like the strength of an individual's spirit is determined by how much truth they can tolerate at once. So, I mean, this is also going to tie in an answer to I had to Jeff's question earlier. I think it's incremental. So I do think it is always best fresh if you can handle it, right? In whatever like palette you can handle it. Like it's hard to quantify it, of course, but like search as much as you can find.
I just want to clarify the difference that I'm talking about is not our own pursuit of truth, but the releasing of truth to an individual, because the context of what we've been talking about is always been our pursuit of truth and whether or not we want to find out more about it. But what I'm talking about is when we are the carriers of truth and it's our opportunity to release it, is there a time and a relevance for when we should release that, or is it straight away?
I think there's way too many like contextual variables to give a solid answer to that. You know what I mean? Like if I was dealing with somebody, I said, hey, I have truth that you might want to know. Personally, I would just have them inquire. You know what I mean? Like whatever degree that they wanted to inquire, or I would just drop a lot on them and like witness whatever amount they processed and then like re-emphasize the part that they ignored or repressed in that conversation.
Wonderful. Next up is Mark, and then Corey, and then we'll go to the breakout rooms. Mark, go ahead.
I'll keep it brief. Just two quick questions. Do you think there may be different types of truth in the sense of like small truth, big truth, creative truth, and destructive truth? And the reason I ask that is because my follow-up question, which is, in this discussion, all I hear about is Liam. I think this is the character's name. I'm very much more concerned with the destruction he wreaks to those around him in his pursuit of truth. And I was wondering what you thought about the fact that shouldn't your search for truth be a personal thing, and you should consider the impact on other people? Like, there's a child involved here.
Well, there was, but I don't see any personally in Liam's, in like Black Mirror. I look at him as a hero. I look at him as noble. I look at him as virtuous. I would admire his pursuit. Like, yeah, sure, he might have. I mean, he could have approached it a little bit better. He was belligerently drunk when he was like doing this. Sure, there's like nuances there, but personally, I don't think, it was either one of two things. Like, yes, he could have like stepped on other boundaries and feelings of other people and expectations, or he could have lived his life raising somebody else's kid. I think that's way more damaging than saying, hey, I think you're having an affair with my wife, or like, hey, I'm sorry, toddler, I have to leave. You'll understand when you're older. I think that's either way, it might be a little bit damaging, but like, that's the cost of truth, right? So I would look at it as like a pay now versus pay later type thing.
But he's imposing his needs to make other people pay. But I can talk about it later in the discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
Next up is Corey. Corey, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, thanks for the talk. I kind of wanted to, maybe this is similar to the last question, but I kind of wanted to ask, in the search for truth, like, let's envision a scenario where Liam is searching for a nugget of truth that's just not there, and his paranoia kind of destroys him. How do you balance, I guess, the thirst for truth with what could also be construed as destructive paranoia, not even to other people, just to yourself?
That's a good question. Maybe like frequent affirmations that you're on the right path to truth. So in Liam's case, like he said, okay, forget this specific example. One was like, oh, you were with him for a month. I thought you said a week. Like, but that's an affirmation right there. Like, he wasn't, before that, he might've been paranoid, right? Like, as we're watching as an audience, we're like, we don't know anything either. He might just be crazy. He might just hate her, whatever. He might just be looking for a way out of the relationship, right? So that might've been paranoia. But he does have these repeated affirmations that he is on the right path. He has feedback, in other words. I would say that. Feedback after a certain length of time, and this is, there's so much context and nuance in every pursuit, because like pursuit of truth in one aspect could come in a year, or it could come in one day, right? So it's like a little bit different, but I would say you have at least some indicators of feedback that you're on the right direction. So Liam had the, little small, furtive lie of, I was with him for a month when it was really, or I was with him for a week when it was really a few months. So he had these little indicators that were connecting the dots to this final truth, to this final revelation.
Okay, last question from Star. Star, go ahead.
Question for John around, can there be the possibility of what I heard earlier, the binary, which is a life of adventure, red pill, a life of being asleep, and non-adventure, blue pill? Okay. Can there be the possibility of a life in the red pill being the duty-bound, rigid, non-adventurous, because it's married to truth and only truth, and the life of the blue pill being the one of adventure, because it allows gray and it allows differences of joy?
That's a very good question. I think this can be accurately summarized. We can actually go over this in the breakout groups. I think this is a perfect segue into the second answer, where I ask individuals in the breakout group, which we're going to get to the questions in a second, have you learned something that you regretted? You know what I mean? That is a very good question. I do see what you're saying with, like, it can be too constricting in sense of truth if your only attribute is truth for truth's sake, right? So I do see a little bit of ambiguity there and room for like interpretation. But as far as the blue side, personally, I don't see how that could possibly lead to adventure and joy and expansion. I think like adventure and fulfillment and expansion are accompanied with lifelong growth. And I think lifelong growth is predicated on the expansion of truth and knowledge and information. So I do see those intimately coalesced. And so there might be a little bit of interpretation on the red side, but blue side, I see that as unequivocally bad.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. So what other questions do you have for people?
Oh, yes.
For the breakout rooms.
Okay, so these breakout rooms, we are going to talk about. The first question is, what do you think Nietzsche meant by, we have art in order to not perish from the truth? What does that mean? Why art, for example? You know, there's a lot of implications we could explore here. I think it's a very thought-provoking quote. I don't really have a full answer for it. It's kind of why I put it up there. The second question is, have you ever, can you recall something in your life that you learned and regret knowing? So like you had that red pill moment and you want to go back, you know? And like, I would say, hinge this on long-term stuff. Cause like you might want to go back immediately, but like long-term, you might be like, okay, I'm grateful I knew that. That's kind of how I live. But can you still think of something that like prolonged that you still want to go back to, not knowing? And the third reason is, why do you think people still perpetuate this phrase, ignorance is bliss? Why is this a cliche? Why is this so widely known and promulgated in society?
Those are great questions. So I'm starting the breakout rooms now. Thank you very much, John, for the presentation as always.
Thank you, always.
Yes, let's